Hi y'all, and welcome back to the garden. Today I'm going to be doing some stuff that I've meant to been doing like over a month ago, and that includes tying up and trellising this Rise Up Amberway rose. This is a proven winners variety rose from the Rise Up series. From my understanding, they can probably be kept in a shrub form, but they're short climbers. I've owned two in this series, Rise Up Lilac Days, which I had at the last garden, which was an exceptional grower and performer. Just in simply a season, it blew me away. And Amberway is giving it a run for its money. So these were planted last year as well. I think I did have them in gallon containers when I received them, but if you remember, I installed this trellis in the spring, so I had to dig them up. And they went through a little bit of a transplant shock in early spring, but they finally kicked it into high gear. And because we've had some cooler nighttime temperatures, the weather this August, y'all, is just really weird. It has been, we've had temperatures in the 50s, and the daytime temperatures have almost had no humidity the past weekend in the 70s. So really odd, but what that is causing is a lot of my plants to push new growth like they would in the fall, including these roses. And so I need to get them tied up and start training onto this trellis. Now I noticed from this variety last year that it kept its leaves all winter, which is really interesting, but it's also next to brick. And so it's a little microclimate there, which is nice. So it could be possible that this rose might keep some of its leaves all winter on this trellis, which will just be extra winter interest. But today I'm going to be pruning out some stems that are a little wild and then training the strongest, most vigorous ones up the trellis. I'm not sure that this rose variety will ever reach the top of this trellis. It might. We're going to try it out and see. Anyone that's interested in the trellis, because I get lots of questions about it, that was handmade locally. So if you're local, I can tell you who that is. Just send me a message to my email or drop a comment below. But what I'm going to be doing this with is Rapid Clip has this nice soft wire here, and this is what I use for trellising. They come in different colors, but I wish the colors were not coordinated to the strength of the wire. Like this one's green and it's really soft and thicker, but it doesn't have a strong strength, which in this case is not a big deal because you can tie it around completely. But if you're just wrapping around like a stake or something, the black's a little better because it's a little more rigid, but I'm going to be using this today anyway. So it's really soft. It is like floral wire, but it's coated in a rubber plastic substance, so it's really easy on the canes of the rose. And we're just going to get started. After this, I'm going to trellis up a tree that I planted that I mentioned to you about a month ago in a video, and that is a red bud Carolina Sweetheart, and I would need to strap it a little more upright because it's wanting to grow a little wonky. Sometimes these small red buds want to do that, and so I want to make sure I'm training it nice and upright so it can provide some privacy. And so we'll take care of that after this. So I've kind of blocked myself out. You can probably see the Super Tunia Vista bubblegum over here. I got to go around the side, and then to get to that rose, I got to kind of crawl through everything. So this is going to be interesting here. Next year, I'm probably not going to plant Super Tunia bubblegum right there so I can easily access these roses because it's causing a bit of a concern. I don't know about you, but we've had super wet weather in Ohio for the past couple of weeks, and it has caused a lot of disease in the garden, and a lot of my annuals are giving up the ghost. So I am already making a list of annuals I will never grow again because I've not been impressed with their performance. And I think some of that might relate to the amount of water they've received over the past couple weeks, but others I'm not so sure, and I think they're just kind of petering out as the season has progressed. So I'm not particularly impressed with some of them, and I'll make a video and tell you what those are later in the season. I'm gonna give them a little longer, but right now some of them could easily be pulled out of the ground because they look really bad. All right, I'm gonna try and see which canes are the most upright here. We got some weird growth going on because I did not prune these early enough, but we'll see if we can get this big cane stuck over here, and then I'm gonna prune out what is left over at the base likely, so it's not as crazy. And I think this is about it for this rose. I cut out some of the canes that were the oldest from the season that had really ratty foliage, especially if these leaves are going to stick around for winter. Kept all the canes that look much better. I'm going to fertilize this, so maybe we'll get some more vertical growth this season. You want to watch fertilizing this time of year so you don't put on too much growth, because that tender growth, if you have early freezes, could be damaged by winter, but I'm not super concerned about it. We still have about 2.5 months until the end of our growing season here, depending on our last frost date. So I'm going to tackle this other one over here, which the foliage on it looks a little better than this one did to begin with, so I may not have to cut as much out. Before I tackle this other rose, I'm going to sterilize my pruners. I use an alcohol solution for now. You can also use a combination of like 1 part bleach to 10 parts water, or a little bit of bleach in a mason jar. I have alcohol with me right now, so that's what I'm going to use. And I really just soak my pruners, the tips of them, in alcohol where I've been cutting on the rows. That is important to control diseases between plants, particularly roses. At my last house, I had a case of Rosette, which can be transmitted by pruning between the roses. So at the new garden, since I do not have a case of that, or I haven't noticed it, because there really weren't any roses on this property when I moved here, I'm being very cautious and careful when I'm pruning between my roses. So I'm going to use some fertilizer. It's just a fish fertilizer. It's called Founder's Fish Fertilizer from Heirloom Roses that I got with my roses earlier this season for some good organic nutrition. It is light as an organic amendment. It is not super heavy in nitrogen, so it's only got 2% here. If you're using a synthetic fertilizer, that is something that could push more growth on your plants, that could make them be damaged by early winter frosts, and so this is a light fertilizer. Hopefully it'll help it push a little more blooms and a little more growth so we can get it a little further up the trellis. We're almost halfway there, so maybe in the next season we'll be to the top. Now, something about climbing roses, I don't think this variety necessarily is going to exhibit that, but true climbing roses, sometimes you like to train those kind of across, because new blooms will be pushed from the cane upwards. And so these I'm just trying to training upright for now. As they get a little bit bigger and more mature, depending on how thick their canes get, I may train them across in the center to get some more blooms and wall coverage. But for now, I'm going to stick with just trying to train them upright and see how tall I can get them, because as I mentioned, these are small climbers. The flies are already loving the fish fertilizer, as you can tell. So this tree behind me here is a Carolina Sweetheart Redbud, and I had it at the last house. And my history with this tree is a little troubled. So I purchased one like 3 years ago online. It showed up from the nursery, and when I took it out of its container to plant it, the dirt fell off the root ball, which is an indicator that that nursery should not have been selling that plant to the public, because it wasn't rooted in and it wasn't ready to be sold. I purchased another one locally, was it 2022? And when we listed the house, before I listed the house, I dug it up because they're really hard to find locally. And after my first experience purchasing it online, I wanted to make sure I got it locally. It is a gorgeous tree. So right now it's not showing a whole lot of it, but it comes out with some variegated leaves here. You can see a little bit here. As it's pushing this new growth, the new growth is super large this fall. This is one of the things I was mentioning. All the trees and stuff are pushing new growth. A lot of the plants are. And the new growth, I've showed it in a couple videos, is super red sometimes. So the leaves vary and are different depending on the time of the season and the temperature. So oftentimes you'll have all of these leaves that look completely different on it, which is really exciting. But if you'll notice, what it's doing is it's kind of leaning this way. And typically most people will recommend that you don't stake a tree, let it do its thing. And I would have to agree, but I want to make sure this grows upright and doesn't start leaning over into the lawn here, because I want it to provide some privacy to the pool area. So I've got this really big stake here that I picked up from Home Depot. I've mentioned several times that I prefer solid fiberglass stakes. Well, you can't get a solid fiberglass stake, or that I couldn't find one this tall. This is intended on staking trees, obviously, and it is that pretty kind of thinnish metal that's hollow inside, but it's going to work for our purposes here. And I'm going to be using the same rubber coated wire with this tree, so as it grows up it won't damage the trunk. That's what you want to be careful of. And even if you attach this wire, you still need to watch it throughout the season to make sure that the wire isn't causing any damage to the trunk of the tree. So this isn't necessarily going to be super pretty, but it's going to give this tree the look I'm looking for a longer period of time. And so I'm going to push this in the ground, and then I'm just going to start kind of training this up before it starts leaning over too much. That way it can stand up a little better. So I'm going to try and get this in the ground. You want to be careful of roots. There is kind of a pointy stake on this. As you push it in the ground, don't do too forcefully. Kind of twist as you go. That way it is not tearing or ripping any of these delicate roots. And I think that might be good enough, because I'm not trying to stake this for structure and as far as preventing the tree from falling over. I'm just trying to basically bonsai it, as I'll call it, so it's not looking quite as weird and curvy. You might want that to happen with some trees, but that is not the focus for this. So let me see if I can get this adjusted a little bit without breaking it, and then I'm going to step back and look at it. I realize the pole is a little crooked, or it looks a little crooked, but my goal right now is just getting this attached first, and then we might can adjust a little bit the actual uprightness of the pole. All right, I'm going to go ahead and attach this first before I do much more adjusting. So I'm using the same black wire. This is the one that's a little tougher or a little more sturdier. I need to order some more. I'm running low. And in these cases, I don't typically like twist around the trunk of the tree. I usually just wrap it around in a cylinder up a distance of the tree trunk to provide some support. So, and it doesn't need any support until it gets right to the top. So we're going to start wrapping it here. I did this to a 9 bark at my last house, and it worked really well, except I used a tougher fiberglass stake there because it didn't need to be as tall. There we go. That helps. Because these red buds do grow so quickly, staking them is something that needs to be watched carefully so that you're not damaging the trunk of the tree with any of the stakes. I'm trying to wrap some of these branches around to help support this stake a little. There we go. Mostly trying to train the leader upright. So this right here that I'm grabbing is the most center part of the tree that I would consider the leader. And that way next year, when this new growth starts coming on, it'll be very upright and straight. I can keep training this up a bit until I just let it go and handle its native structure. There we go. So it looks a little funny right now, but these leaves, as they get some sun, will turn back down, and I can actually pull these out a little bit, and then it'll start growing more upright and correctly for me. Now, when you do something like this, I like the levels that you can now see, so it's very like airy in between. Of course, as these branches get heavier, they're going to weigh down a little bit, but I like this effect much more than the Willy Wonka Dr. Seuss thing that was going on previously. Here's a closer look of what that looks like now. You can see all these nice layers on here. Some of these limbs are tangled in within one another. There we go. But see how nice this foliage is on this tree? These are a little older here, but I love all the different colors. I think it's interesting that it's not pushing variegated foliage this time of year. It seems like most of that was in the spring, but this tree will continue to be interesting. It's one of the most interesting red buds I've found. There's a lot of great ones, and I have several of them One's called Midnight Express, and it has pretty dark foliage. There's Rising Sun, which I have, which is really gorgeous and has yellow and green foliage and orange throughout the season as it's pushing new growth. There is several others, one called Flamethrower that's really interesting too, but I tend to like maybe this one the most. All right, so what's next on the list? While it is cooler out, relatively speaking, we still got some humidity picking up this week. I'm going to try and plant a few things that are in my shrub pile. I'm saving the rose wall, so for those of you who might be new, there is this like 40-foot wall of posts here, and I have planted underneath them �̘𝗟𝗓𝗧𝗦 roses, which are doing phenomenally. They're pushing a lot of growth too. Let me show you that right quick. You can see all this beautiful new red on root growth that is coming up from these roses. I need to come through and deadhead. I might do that tonight. But it is already producing some of the most stunning flowers. It's nuts, and they smell so good. But I think I'm going to save this trellising project for these roses later to this fall, because I want them to put on as much growth as they can before I decide how I'm going to trellis them. So I know how I'm going to do it, but I want them to go ahead and put their canes on for winter or before winter, and then trellis the final canes before winter starts. And so I'm going to be doing like the metal wire between the rails all the way across, maybe every 2 to 3 feet. And so that's going to be a project. I think I spaced it out where I could do maybe 3 feet apart all the way up. And so the wire will run all the way down. And then these are roses that would bloom better if the canes were kind of spread apart. So I'm going to spread, there's one rose in the center, but its canes will go this way, and so forth, all the way down. And given how much growth these have put on this year, I'm thinking these are going to be stunning even next year. I mean, here's some more roses that it's put on. These are probably some of my best looking roses from the ones I planted from spring. They're certainly the most vigorous ones, as they should be, as climbers. Oh look, praying mantis. How cute. I just love finding creatures in the garden. It's so much fun. So let's talk about this swing set, because I mentioned to a lot of y'all, I had several questions after I moved to this property about what I'm going to do with this, if I'm going to remove it. And no, I like to swing, so I added new swings here. But last week I ordered an actual porch swing to replace this weird contraption here that's really aged. And I'm going to be, after I get some more wood chips, coming in and putting wood chips under this whole area and edging around it. And what I've decided to do, and it's going to kind of expand as I kind of get the plants in and think about it, is around here. So the edge of this, it's going to be like a giant oval basically, but the bed's going to come out around here and around all these legs. And I'm going to plant, hopefully bloom-struck hydrangeas in the center. So those are an endless summer variety. And then I'm going to have Pop Star on the outside here, which is a shorter hydrangea. Those are two varieties that have done pretty well for me as far as their rebloom. This is an area that was protected completely in the afternoon from afternoon sun. It will get a little bit of sun in the evening or like a lunchtime, because you can see it's kind of exposed here. These things will be on drip irrigation, and we'll see how well they'll do. And then I want to start, so those things are all going to come out and be moved, those trees and that lilac, I've talked about all that. I'm going to start building some blockage towards this area of the property behind me here. So back here is where I keep my mulch and my wood chips and stuff, and it's kind of an ugly sight from the backyard here. So I've requested a Gladiator crabapple, which is a gorgeous crabapple. I just saw at Bailey's last week, and I'm going to put it here, and that's not going to interfere with my vegetable garden space that I'm trying to set up and establish here, and I'll still be able to get around the swing set with the tractor on both sides and everything, so that should still all be good. Kind of block off, that way I can create some little better vignettes as I'm taking footage and photos of the garden back this way, so things will just look a little nicer. Now let's talk about the Bailey's trip briefly. I enjoyed it so much. Met a lot of people I'd followed online for a long time, either on YouTube or Instagram or both. There were probably about 2/3 of the people that I'd never met before, 1/3 that I hadn't followed before this trip. And so lots of great creators. There are links and photos all over my Instagram and others' Instagram showing who all those people are. There were about 20, less than 25 of us. So I'm not going to sit and name us all, but there were a lot of us and great people. Bailey, the way they do things is a little different than some other nurseries that are in this big business to get plants all across the country. They serve most everywhere in the United States except the Southwest, because a lot of their plant genetics aren't great for that area just because it's so darn hot down there. I don't know if any of you are watching from down there, but if you are, I'm sorry. It's really hot. And so a lot of the plants that thrive here in the Midwest, where Bailey's from Minnesota, don't necessarily do well there. And they're working on improving that. But they grow from cuttings all the way through container plants, which is something some of those other nurseries do not do. A lot of nurseries only grow plugs, and then they send off the plugs, and those plugs are grown on by other nurseries that may be local to you for sale. Bailey's takes the cuttings. They have this interesting, like, huge greenhouses where they just have sand, and they stick a lot of the cuttings in sand and propagate them there, and then they pot them up into liners. Those liners may be sold as liners to other nurseries for sale, but then they also pot those liners up into containers, whether that be 1, 3, or 5 gallon containers, and sell on to the consumer. So it was really interesting to see that aspect of the nursery trade, because I had not seen that at the other big nurseries I'd gone to. So it was really exciting and different. And they have a lot of really cool plants I'm interested in checking out. And I've placed a request for probably more than I probably should have, but I want to fill out this back shrub border with some evergreens and some deciduous shrubs from their collection as too. So this shrub border I've mentioned several times. It is going to be filled to the brim with all sorts of stuff. And so they have a lot of things that I've not tried before, like some Nandinas. I did plant a couple of those at the last garden, but I moved before I really was able to see how those do. So they have a lot of southern leaning shrubs that I want to try out in this property. So some Nandinas, there's a really interesting azalea. There's a Gardenia that's really gorgeous, and it's a zone 7, and it just came out this year. But I requested it because I want to trial it, and I think I might put it on the south side of the house here where I have this Yardline viburnum. It's right there that I'm trialing because it's a zone 7 too. So I'm trying to find some microclimates to stick some of these things. Everything else I ordered other than that Gardenia is hardy down to zone 6. But I typically, as a gardener in my last house, just because I was cautious about planting anything that was zone 6 or higher, I'm trying more things that are just zone 6. So since I've lived in Ohio, we've not had temperatures below zone 6, thankfully. Oh, that would be awful. But now that I'm comfortable and I have the space to trial things, I want to do more things than just those tried and true shrubs that I've grown to love that have performed well for me. So there's a huge list. I think there was like almost 50 different varieties of shrubs on it. And I'm excited if they'll send me some of those to trial out in this garden. Now, I have changed my ideas about this space since seeing all of those beautiful things. It's kind of how it happens, ain't that right? So I was originally just going to kind of place one big shrub all the way around. I want to show you some footage from the Bailey Expo that they were preparing for after we left, and show you how beautiful one of those sceneries is that I think Ryan, who is one of the marketing people who works for Bailey, and his parents own the company now, designed for the expo, and it is stunning. Now there are some perennials in this footage I'm showing you, but I'm going to try and stick with mainly shrubs. There may be a few like grasses. I've told you I might use some woody perennials in here that are perennials that act like shrubs, but I don't want a whole lot of perennial cutback or anything that I'll need to do in this garden. I'm going to try and keep it shrubs that are low maintenance, don't necessarily need to be pruned at all, if ever, or if they do, maybe it's spring or fall, or just cleaning out dead wood, keeping things simple so this is less maintenance, because after all, it's just me that handles this garden. And if I have a huge area to plant up that I can't take care of later, it's not really worth planting, is it? So all that being said, I did run one thing of drip irrigation, a blank distribution tubing down the center of this, and that may still be okay. I may have to split this back bed into another zone if I'm going to be planting in front of and around these shrubs that I already have here. And I know that's what I want to do now after I've seen how beautiful one of those mixed shrub borders that Ryan kind of put together can be. So there's plenty of room. These things are going to grow on and take many years, but I kind of want to pack it pretty tightly right now. And then as things grow on, I can move those into other spaces. I'm trying to not create like so many beds, it's overwhelming, but I've been dreaming about placing another one here and just having this like a long walkway in between and having more of a shrub border here on this side too. I have to remember that I need to be able to get the tractor through, but I could have a short one. Look, I'm convincing myself on camera while I'm talking to y'all. I could have a short 10-foot one or so right here and still be able to get maybe trucks and my tractor through on that side. But that is not going to happen this year. I also have to remember the reality of being able to get wood chips, because all of this garden back here, I'm not going to be able to mulch with actual wood mulch from a person that you can go buy it from, because it would just be way too expensive and costly and I wouldn't be able to afford it. So I'm sticking with wood chips back here. I'm liking how it's looking. The goal would be to have so many plants in the space you couldn't see the wood chips when it was over. So we'll see how much of that we can get accomplished over the next season. It's going to be a long process, but I want this to be kind of a finessing period of this garden. I've got a lot of the bones down. Next and going forward, it's going to be planting some interesting trees and then a lot of interesting shrubs I've never tried before to, you know, just like I said, finesse the space. Thank y'all for joining me for this video, and remember, be a light. Take care. Bye.